What's up, lads? You with Budget Monk, and I wanted to shoot a quick video here on the topic of rank 3 trade centers. So I'm going to analyze and break down rank 3 trade centers. I think this is something that is not so well saturated of a topic. I don't see people talk about it too often, and of course this is going to help you guys min-max when it comes to placing your rank 3 trade centers. So with that being said, as far as the fundamentals are concerned, you have the same amount of potential rank 3 trade centers as you have merchants. So typically you have 2 merchants in the beginning of the game, meaning you can have no more than 2 rank 3 trade centers. In my case, I control the whole bloody world, etc., blah, blah, blah. So we've got a million merchants, but that's only late game shenanigans, right? In the early game, you want to be very deliberate where you put them down. It costs you 1,000 ducats to upgrade from rank 2 to rank 3. So very important to be very specific as to where you put those down. So the major takeaway of the rank 3 trade center, if you read the bottom modifier, is it gives possible number of buildings +1. But this is to owned provinces in area. So of course, if we go to the area map mode, it's talking about Tuscany in this case. So in other words, you gain +1 building slot in the entire area. And this is the major and most significant aspect to the rank 3. A lot of people sort of assume that trade power is important and so on, and that may be the case, but I think it is far overweighed by the building slots. So let's say hypothetically that it's sort of the early late game. It's like the late part of the early game. You're sort of transitioning into the mid game. Sort of right at the before the age of absolutism, let's say, and you're playing a Russian power. Let's say you started as Muscovy, and you're very, very affluent. You may have or want to put it in your capital. That might be your inclination. Well, there's a few things to consider. Number one is that you're only getting access to 3 building slots, but let's be honest, the building slot in Muscovy is going to be overkill and not necessary. So in other words, you're only generating 2 building slots, whereas let's say Novgorod, the state, you will be generating 5 building slots. But more importantly, just like I said, you'll have overkill in your capital. For people who do not know, a province basically has 2 building slots by default. That's the base value, okay? And then there are modifiers. Some of the worst provinces in the game are like this: Arctic, giving -1 building slot. So these are basically frigid provinces. You gain a building slot for every additional 10 development. So once you reach 10, there will be a building slot. But the other major way you access building slots is the terrain. So it's just inbuilt with the terrain. Basically, grasslands and farmlands have +1 building slot. Now, the thing about Novgorod is that it is all woods and forest and so on. And this is the type of thing you want to be thinking about, is that we can gain building slots, 5 building slots. You don't really get areas larger than 5, but also they are theoretically even more valuable because of the terrain. So it's harder to develop these provinces and hypothetically more valuable. Obviously, you also want to consider things like resources. That's another thing to consider. And so if you're a Russian power, this is a very valuable place to drop it. Let's talk about building composition a little bit. Ultimately, if you were min-maxing, see, in my game, I annexed Russia quite late in the game, and I don't really care at this stage. But if you were playing Russia, you would want the workshop, manufactory, and the courthouse. Now, this requires you to have at least 10 development. In this case, this has actually 1 building more than I have building slots here. That happens sometimes. But you can see, just like this, this is probably, if you have 2 buildings, this is probably the best composition, right? A manufactory and a courthouse. When you access the 3rd building, it would be a workshop. So you can anticipate that and build up workshops as you grow, drop down manufactories as you get access to them, and ultimately a courthouse. So I'd recommend, in terms of buildings, that you stick to building churches in grasslands and areas where you are going to have a building slot. Have that awareness as time goes on. But if you gave a building slot to the entire region, or the entire area, or you had the foresight to know that you will eventually give +1, then you could, of course, build churches here comfortably, knowing that you will not run out of building slots for the more important buildings down the line. Alternatively, and this is where things get more deep, is manpower buildings. So let's take a look at this state, for example. If assuming we're playing a Russian nation, if you look at this state, you'll notice that from the beginning of the game, the development is pretty low, and it's quite tough to get those building slots, but it is reasonable to at least get 10. I believe all of them start at above 10 development, apart from this begins at 8. So getting 10 is reasonable, and then you would give every single province a building slot by upgrading this to rank 3 and upgrading that to rank 3. That's what I recommend. With that in mind, the ultimate kind of composition here, if you had 4 building slots, would most likely be the workshop, manufactory, the courthouse in a state, right? And then this would actually be a manpower building, okay? The 4th one generated by the trade center, a manpower building. And that, of course, gives you the option in a state to instead build the soldier's household instead of a manufactory. And you can generate some of the most manpower possible. When you look at the soldier's household, it will have double effectiveness on grain, fish, livestock, or wine. So in other words, building the soldier's household, you can basically designate specific areas as your manpower areas. And finally, I want to talk about the rank 3s. Notice that both of these provinces that I recommend are inland. Well, in actuality, a ton of trading regions are coastal. So, for example, in the English Channel, every single one of them is coastal. 100% of them are coastal, every single one. Oh, apart from York. My mistake. That is the only one in land. But you can see here, North Sea, very similar. Coastal, coastal, coastal. Lubeck, very similar. So notice I'm talking about inland. Well, if you mouse over my rank 3 trading regions, you will see that the owned province generates 33% increased manpower. Now, if this was a coastal rank 3, it would generate 33% more sailors. So I think you guys can agree with me that manpower is far superior to sailors. And that synergizes really nicely with giving the building slots to basically access the manpower buildings, but also generate more manpower. It also gives you, when you're building your nation over time, you want to have the awareness of how valuable it would be to potentially develop this with manpower instead of role generals for professionalism, for example, because ultimately that manpower will go a long way. And then finally, I want to show you in reference to this specific game, I made a video recently talking about trading companies, and you can see the sort of scattered look. If you watch that video, that is how I go about trading companies. But then you can see that in certain areas, I have fleshed them out and added everything to the trading company. Do you see this? Including Wallachia, Bulgaria, Serbia, Hungary. Now, if we take a look at the trade map, you'll notice that this is exactly where I have designated my rank 3 cities is inland. And of course, there is a trading company bonus to give you 100% increased manpower. Now, there's a problem with this, of course, which is that these are not stated, and therefore they have terrible autonomy. But that is kind of alleviated with the manpower. So if we take a look at Pest, for example, because the other thing to always consider is the resource, right? Well, every single province in Pest has double manpower from the soldier's household. So you can see that I have built 100% increased manpower, a flat manpower bonus which has double effect, and then another 100% manpower investment to the entire state with plus 33% increased manpower. Now, unfortunately, because of my play style here and the ultimate goal of this run, I have next to no modifiers reducing autonomy at all. let me see, actually. I have this for 10%, and then I have this investment for 5 autonomy in the Pesh Trading Company region. All right, but it's not like we're taking the economic hegemon, which gives you 20% autonomy. It's not like we have expansion, which gives you reduced autonomy. I actually have taken expansion here. Reduced autonomy, I'm never going to finish that. So just keep in mind that this is at 75 autonomy, and this produces almost 4,000 manpower per year. So to give you a kind of comparison here, this is one of my only states in the Falklands. It used to be my capital. This obviously has 0 autonomy. It has the same setup, the exact same setup, and it has an insane 14 in mil. So this is literally, 16,000 per year. That's over 1,000 manpower per month. This is the sort of peak potential manpower setup you're ever going to get. And in this case, obviously, it's relative to your dev, which is really high here. But just keep that in mind, is that, we didn't state these. They cost next to nothing because they have the town hall. In terms of governing capacity, they cost nothing. And the entire state combined, if you add this up, is giving us a pretty significant amount of manpower. You can see the problem is the military dev is low. But I've done the same thing inside of Vienna. You can see every single area. That's what I had in mind. Wallachia is another really, really good one with for manpower, with the livestock doubles the soldier's household. And then I have a manufactory on the copper, which is a really nice resource. So that is how I recommend using this. I hope that you guys learned something. And you can see that certain areas are really well geared towards generating manpower. That is how I deal with it in the late game, when I have essentially no states whatsoever. So I hope you guys learned something. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in another video.